Okay, so today we are reading a poem by Walt Whitman called For You, O Democracy. For you, O democracy, come, I will make the continent indissoluble. I will make the most splendid race the sun ever shone upon. I will make divine magnetic lands with the love of comrades, with the lifelong love of comrades. I will plant companionship thick as trees along all the rivers of America, and along the shores of the Great Lakes, and all over the prairies. I will make inseparable cities with their arms about each other's necks, by the love of comrades, by the manly love of comrades. For you, these from me, O democracy, to serve you, ma femme. For you, I am trilling these songs. So the first thing I notice is the fact that the poem is addressed to democracy. Understanding democracy as a woman, he calls her ma femme at the end, and a woman who hasn't yet arrived. He still doesn't think that she's there. Um, but he's inviting her to come and trying to give an optimistic case for her to do that.
Yeah, one interesting thing about that is that then the tenor of all these like sort of I will clauses becomes like something like a promise that somebody would make to, or like in treaties for someone to come, and then so all of these like sort of things that he proposes to do are presumably like desirable.
So if you imagine democracy to be a woman, then I think like one way of reading the poem is that you have to imagine that she's a woman who's reluctant, she's skeptical maybe, um, and she's definitely like a good person to have around, like and actually the most desirable person to have around. Um, and you have to kind of make a case, or Walt Whitman, or the speaker of this poem, has to like make a case for why democracy should come. The case that he's making to democracy is that he's going to build a space that's hospitable for her. And this repetition that you get in both stanzas emphasizes that, like, the building power is nothing other than love. It gives a very different idea of democracy than, like, we normally maybe are used to thinking about it. Because, like, when we think of democracy, we often think of things like courthouses, certain procedures, constitutions, but like the way that Whitman is talking about it, he's talking about democracy as something that like starts at the ground level.
And that's definitely reflected in sort of the image that opens the second stanza, which is this idea of sort of planting companionship thick as trees. So we have sort of an idea of companionship being like literally something that grows from the ground up, and instead of casting, I guess, democracy as something that like exerts some sort of force or power down upon people, we have this dramatic. Democracy hasn't even arrived yet. It's on the onus of the people themselves to cultivate companionship as trees.
And like literally building democracy is very much something like going out into your garden and planting trees, like putting seeds in the ground and like pouring water on it. And so it's in these everyday activities, these very concrete activities that we like encounter on a moment to moment basis, where the work of democracy is starting and kind of being laid out. Um,
Mm.
Almost in the sense that like if we did this enough, if we worked like this enough, we would just find that democracy would be there. You know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we have three sections. Um, the the final section is sort of the, I don't know, the key to the lock or something. So here we finally get the addressee, who's, I guess, implied by the title, but she only shows up sort of named in the end. And I guess there's a progression from the first stanza to the second stanza that we could talk about. They're very closely aligned in form. They have almost the exact same form. But in the first one, the promises he makes seem to be, I mean, a little bit more grand. So he says that he'll make the continent indissoluble. He'll make the most splendid race the sun ever shone upon. And he'll make divine magnetic lands, right? So, I mean, what do you think is the sort of the force of all of those?
I mean, like one like idea that I had about these two stanzas is it's I mean if you want to keep going with this idea of Whitman persuading democracy to come by building, it's almost like so she's super reluctant at the beginning. It sounds like a crazy idea, like what democracy? No, like people can't do that. Um, and then he makes his first proposal, and he says, "Okay, I'll make these uh, magnetic lands, and it's going to be lovely. It's going to be huge. You know, like the sun is going to shine on it." It's a distant idea in the first stanza. It's like an abstraction. You know, big things, suns, lands, things like that. And then it becomes a little more alive to the speaker's mind. Now he sees trees, and he sees that he can plant them along shores of great lakes, etc., etc. And so it's brought even a little closer, or democracy has been persuaded even a little more. Um, and so like it's kind of pointing the way forward. Like this is the direction. We have to make it more and more vivid through the acts of our lives. I know you had been interested in the word trilling.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that it was an interesting departure from, I guess, what we would expect, which is singing these songs, right? So, like, what's the difference between trilling and singing?
Well, I think there are a number of differences. I mean, I'm used to hearing trill in the context of instrumental music, like so pianos and like violins. So I mean, there is this kind of like ambiguity, like because if singing is definitely something that like a body does, but like instruments trill. So any body that is not just a human body, but like a wooden body, like that of a violin, um, or I don't know what piano. What are piano keys made of? They can't be ivory. Um,
Not sure.
uh,
They're probably just painted like something.
Right. Well, even those keys trill, you know. So I can even imagine like the landscape trilling, birds trill, and so like trilling makes these poems. Like, I mean, even it doesn't even say that like the real poem is America in a way. So like trilling, like in Leaves of Grass, like he's talking about like his poetry is not just like a phenomenon of producing words, but like for him, like the real poem would, in a sense, be democracy itself. Uh, and like trilling is a word that doesn't exclude. It's not like bigoted against pencils and cars and roads and violins. Anything can trill. You just need to like vibrate it a little. Um,
Yeah, that's true. Another thing is that there's a kind of perpetual motion about trilling, but it's also something that's like very like fervent, you know? Like it's It's like
Fervent, you said?
yeah, like it's not a noise that happens naturally. Like it almost requires, unless you're a bird, maybe. But like it's a weird high pitched, like it requires like constant effort kind of a thing.
Right, like
Um,
it's strenuous.
yeah, it's
Um,
strenuous.
the work of democracy is strenuous,
Yeah, um,
but pleasurable.
but pleasurable. And then also, I mean, a thing that sort of we come back to in the end then is that like all of these activities that he's been outlining throughout the whole poem, is that uh, like these sort of building activities, that trilling or like singing, the kind of work of poetry is also one of them.
Right. I mean, the fact is that I mean, yeah, so like throughout the poem, he's been talking about how he'll make physical things and he'll like rearrange them in ways. Like he'll plant trees, he will make a race, he will make lands. Like these are acts of like real creation, they're godlike. And then he doesn't distinguish, in a sense, between that kind of making and the making of poems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this poem itself, in a way, like is a, and I mean, like I really think that that's true. That like as much as making buildings, like creating infrastructure, and all of those things that we want the government to do, um, we do also have to. I mean, people talk about changing minds and hearts, and I mean that's a very poetic activity.
Mm-hmm.
It's as much a part of building democracy as is all the physical stuff.
For you, O democracy, come, I will make the continent indissoluble. I will make the most splendid race the sun ever shone upon. I will make divine magnetic lands with the love of comrades, with the lifelong love of comrades. I will plant companionship thick as trees along all the rivers of America, and along the shores of the Great Lakes, and all over the prairies. I will make inseparable cities with their arms about each other's necks, by the love of comrades, by the manly love of comrades. For you, these from me, O democracy, to serve you, ma femme. For you, I am trilling these songs.